Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Episode 2 podcast, Cybersecurity, What It Means for K-12 and Universities. Our hosts are, as always, Greg Kovich, Global Sales Director for Education at Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise, and Don Otto, Ridley School District Director of Network Services. Our guest today is Tom Dugas, Chief Information Security Officer at Duquesne University with 15 years in higher education. Greg and Don, take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Blaine, and welcome, Don and Tom. Thank you so much for your time today. Our topic today is cybersecurity on campus, and I think this is going to be a terrific show for everyone, given that we have really the two segments of education, K through 12 and higher education and what it means. Don, you're focused in K through 12. Your requirements are a bit different than higher education. But, Tom, as you know, EDUCAUSE has released for the third year in a row cybersecurity as the number one concern for CIOs. And, at Duquesne, I've visited your campus. I see how very serious you guys are about providing services to your students. Can you give us some thoughts on, kind of the trends and challenges that you've been seeing on your campus?
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me for the podcast today. Higher education and information security are at a crossroads in a sense. Essentially, security is becoming harder and more difficult in an environment like ours because traditionally universities have been open. I mean, we were really developed to research-oriented, open-oriented, support academic freedom. Well, in doing so, we basically put big bullseyes on our heads for attackers looking to find an easy target. So generally speaking, we've been, some of the first people there were out on the internet who actually had the most IP addresses, and most of those IP addresses were public. And, the campus environment is generally open for people to kind of peruse and look through what we are doing on a general basis. And so when attackers just start looking at things on the internet, they easily see that higher education is the biggest target that they can look at because we just traditionally have not put the controls in place that are necessary. So what's happening now is over the last several years, regulations have come on board and the industry has changed quite a bit and privacy has really taken hold. And so now we're competing against, the privacy and protection of our community and the openness of the academic nature of what we do. And they're kind of a yin and a yang, and they're pushing and pulling against each other all the time. And it is quite challenging to work in this space in terms of information security because of that.
That's very interesting, Tom. It's, in K-12, we've always been, I guess, viewed as a closed organization, and because we always had to protect our children at the ages K through 12. We've had these government regulations come up over the years with SIPA and FERPA and other government regulatory tasks that we have to kind of conform to. But yet we're at the point where we're not really spending a whole lot of funds on cybersecurity. We're just kind of getting into that market now. So it's interesting, the dynamics where higher ed was always open and at the same time to provide for that research opportunity. But you guys kind of knew that you had to spend something to kind of put these protection services in place, and we're just appear to be getting involved in that right now. So it's kind of interesting to hear that.
Well, when I set up my first network in K through 12, this is the late 90s. It was just a firewall. That's all it was for me. And I put the firewall up and I went to the school board and said, we are secured. And I imagine that there's a lot more to security nowadays than that. Can you guys enlighten me a little bit about what I'm missing in the last 20 years?
So one thing you got to think about in a college campus that makes us so dramatically unique, we essentially at least 3 populations and probably about a dozen more in a smaller state. But generally speaking, we serve our researchers and educators. We serve our administrative and business personnel, and then our students. And the reason why I separate them in that sense is our students, for the most part, live here and operate here 9 months out of the year. And so living away from home and coming to a college campus, they're so used to having all the comforts at home. They want that here. So that includes their Xboxes, their smart devices, their wireless printing, all the things that home network that you used to set up behind a firewall was able to accommodate. It doesn't quite work that way when you get into an enterprise class environment like a university. But we need to give them the ability for them to feel comfortable being here 9 months out of a year and away from home and being able to experience some things that they enjoy. And so it really gets complicated on that sense. Now, on the faculty side, they have two sides. They're teaching and educating the students and creating the people who are going to lead us into tomorrow. But at the same time, they're providing research and collaboration that often goes not just within our own institution, but they often go across many institutions and many continents. So they're sharing information, sometimes very sensitive information, beyond our boundaries. And so it's changed dramatically in a sense that a firewall doesn't protect us anymore because our boundaries don't end on campus or within our network. It basically is worldwide in terms of where it is. And think about our student population. We have students from, probably 24, or 36 countries from around the world, and probably every single state in the United States is represented here on campus.
And with all those different countries, how does GDPR play into strategies these days? Is it anything that you have to do? I know that there's been some confusion by many people that it doesn't matter if their feet are in the United States. We don't need to follow the GDPR rules. But then I've heard other folks saying, that's not true at all. That's their country of origin, and that is their right. That's that's the obligation. Can you help enlighten us on maybe your exploration of that and how you address it?
Sure, absolutely. And Duquesne is a multinational organization, just to keep that in perspective. We have campuses in Ireland, and we have campuses in Italy. So our boundaries do not just end here on the bluff in Pittsburgh. They actually go quite beyond that. So without a doubt, we are subject to GDPR because of that. Those are two European Union nations, although one may change at some point with the Brexit situation. Mm-hmm. But at the very least, we have faculty, staff, and students who are living, working, and operating in the European Union regularly. So we certainly have some obligations there. So what we've been doing is we set up a virtual team here and a chairperson of that committee that's really helping us to work through that scenario of what it really means for us. But we're taking it very seriously, and that's all part of the GDPR considerations. What data do you own? Whose data is it? And how are you handling that data? And what obligations do you have to protect it? So certainly for us, we take all data seriously. And if you think about the California Privacy Act that's just being enacted as well, it's almost a replica of GDPR. So rather we're protecting the data of GDPR, we're taking it from the state of California. The protections we have to have in place need to be pretty much the same, and we need to make sure the privacy is the utmost concern here. So you have to make sure you update your consent agreements. You make sure you tell people what you're tracking and how you're using it. You have to make sure you prepare for things like right to be forgotten. And take into account, we have study abroad programs. When our United States citizens travel to the European Union, what they do in the European Union is protected by EU GDPR regulations. So it doesn't just apply for GDPR or for European Union citizens. It's really people who live, work, and operate in that and those countries under European Union. So it's a serious matter, and we're going to see case laws start to take hold here over the next couple years, and we've already seen some of the first lawsuits start to get filed here recently. And so we're hoping to be on the ball with this, and we have some outside consultants helping with us with that. But everyone should be taking it pretty seriously at this point. If you're not, you might put yourself at risk.
Yeah, and Greg, before we started the podcast, you had mentioned to me about you were going to ask a question about foreign exchange students, and that just brought what Tom just said about European. If we have any European foreign exchange students, it may be something that we do need to be concerned with, even though we're a local public school district that really doesn't. We live in our own communities, and we don't think about having Europeans or having to deal with that. But foreign exchange students may be the one area that we may not have thought about. We may have some liability there.
Oh, Don, I'll tell you too. Yeah. There's teeth in the GDPR. There's financial teeth into it, and it's something that absolutely needs to be explored. Tom, I don't know about the California Privacy Act, and I love to see that someone in the United States here is looking at privacy and making it serious, and especially a large state like California. You mentioned a consent agreement. Is that like an acceptable use policy?
Almost, but essentially what it is, you may not know it oftentimes, but when you're signing up for newsletters online or you're signing up for offers that may be coming in the mail, there's often this little tiny thing that's a terms and conditions at the bottom. That terms and conditions link often has a bunch of legal language behind it about your privacy and your protection and what they're doing with your data. So for instance, if you really read that in some of the cloud software agreements that you actually click through, oftentimes it says that they own all of your data and everything you put up there. And so that's pretty scary stuff. You can't do that anymore. And if you do, you have to be more explicit about that. And if you do collect that information, you don't own it. The individual owns that data, not that's collecting it anymore. And they have the right to actually ask you to remove that data or dispose of that data if they do not want you to possess it any longer. So that's changed the game for a lot of companies, particularly marketing companies and social media companies that really had put a lot of protections in their disclaimers and consent agreements that basically say, look, whatever you put up here, we're not responsible for, and we basically own the rights to it. And the EU and California and others saying, no, that's just not the way it's going to work any longer. You're going to have to protect our data the right way.
Love that. No, honest to goodness, so that it's not really an acceptable use policy. I know that for me, again, in my school district, when we brought the internet in, the school board was all about, we need to have appropriate use by the students, and they need to understand that there's ramifications to not following the rules. Don, have you seen your AUPs change from, the time that you first started there to where you are today?
They have changed or been modified slightly based on the new technologies coming out. Now that the social media is out, we still really don't use that internally. And that's not just us. It's a lot of schools in the area because it's that sensitive area where you really need to kind of look at board policies and update things that are there to kind of keep the protections in place. So we're still, fighting through those battles to determine if we really want to use social media as part of the day-to-day educational process here. It really hasn't taken a hard route yet, at least in Ridley. And I've some of my colleagues in other schools in the area, some do use it, and they have said the same thing where you really got to look at board policy, make sure your acceptable use policies are pretty much updated to cover yourself. And insurance coverage is always, always a mandate as well with that.
Wow. And gosh, I'll tell you, and this is such a can of worms. I can see why it's the number one issue for CIOs in higher education, because right now our focus has been on, we've kind of gone the gamut of privacy and data security and the different constituents such as research and now bringing in social media. But there also appears like, I read a lot of Gartner, and it seems like the Internet of Things is starting to take off. And to me, remember that denial of service attack that took down the DNS 2 years ago, I think it was? Yeah. And that was all because of home devices, IoT devices. Is that a concern for you, Tom? Are you guys addressing that?
The Internet of Things certainly is a really big concern for a college campus, and I think for a lot of people. So in our environment itself, we own our own energy center, for example. So which means we produce our own energy for campus. And because of that, we have sensors and systems and alerts and monitors that basically regulate the heating and cooling and the electricity all across campus. So take into account that, along with the fact that we have medical practices that are, taking in simulations and robots and robotic care amongst our medical professionals and what they're doing in the environment. So we have to find a way to get those things to commingle in our environment without putting the university at risk. So, and traditionally, it's really hard to try to figure out how to make that all work and to properly secure that and monitor that. So we've been investing a lot into our security automation and monitoring technology just to keep an eye on the things that are happening on campus that we may or may not know about as people start to bring these things on campus. And students, they love this stuff. It's great. They go home for Christmas, come home with the greatest new smart light bulb and plug it in and tell me how it's going to work on campus. And unfortunately, we're not quite equipped to put the smart light bulbs on campus yet, but we are able to put some of their other things on campus for sure.
And Tom, I guess you want to maintain some level of transparency too, because you don't want kids, people get frustrated. They want to be able to use these things and move forward, but you need to maintain that layer of transparency. But yet, security is a big concern as well. So I find that it's kind of might be a balancing act.
It really is, and just this year we launched our Internet of Things network for campus. It literally is called the IoT network. And prior to that, the biggest complaint we had students asking us to put their gaming devices and, their Google Homes and Alexas on the network, and they weren't able to do that. And so now we open up the IoT, give them the ability to register their devices and get them on the network. And, now their issue is not so much that they're worried about whether they can get their devices connected. They just want more of it.
Yeah.
They want more access and more places, and anywhere from our parking garages to our open access areas to our arenas, and they just want to have it more accessible and broadly across our campus as much as possible. So, it certainly is growing in complexity. We have wireless access points, for example, in every single dorm room on campus in order to provide the coverage we need to make sure that they can do the things they need to do for educational purposes, as well as enjoying living here on campus and enjoying the things we offer.
Do you have like a Wild West VLAN that you put these things on? Or?
Yeah, we have a student VLAN. I want to call it the Wild West VLAN. I think I try to treat our students a little bit more fairly than that. But, yes, we do have the student VLAN separated, and we do have them segmented away from the rest of the campus. But keep in mind, though, that, the way the security risk really comes into campus is not necessarily on the devices. Our biggest risk is not the devices becoming infected with malware. That's not how people are targeting us. It really is phishing and social engineering
stuff. Yeah,
and I mean that's how they're getting to us. They're trying to convince the students that they have this great part-time job or this great new thing that they're going to get for free, and as soon as they're able to get the credentials or compromise the student in some way, they're immediately going after the faculty and the administrators. And they're just trying to find a way in. And as soon as they do, they're trying to branch out across the organization as much as possible. And, the easiest way to get to someone on a college campus is by food or money. That's the way that it always works. So
what you just said, social engineering, both of you, how do you train your staff and even students for awareness and to be, smart citizens on the internet?
Well, we don't do a whole lot of that right now. We're trying to find and build professional development calendars to focus on strategies to do better, teaching strategies in the classroom. And we don't tend to focus on things that are security related. Because we just don't have the time and the resources to do that. Not to say that it's not important to do that, but I've been reading a lot about these phishing campaigns that are done internally to detect who your folks are that are kind of not following protocol, and then obviously target those folks from a social standpoint to say, hey, you guys got to stop clicking on this, and to provide some level of training. We haven't gotten into that yet, but it's something I'm looking at doing here probably in the next 6 to 12 months.
Wow, there's a huge amount of resources like Ren Isaac and even SANS and others that have tools and materials for you. Do you leverage any of that, Tom, or what's your approach over at Duquesne?
Sure. So this is probably the area we've invested the most in the last couple of years since I've been here. So first and foremost, we bought a very advanced technology solution to help protect us in the back end of email. So that advanced threat protection basically helps us to do safe linking on our systems that basically runs any attachments and links in the emails through basically a compiler that basically checks it for malware and basically malicious links. So therefore, that has saved us hundreds of thousands of malicious traffic coming into our environment every day. and it's probably cut down the number of hacked accounts that actually have fallen for phishes by like 95%. So single-handedly, it has saved our organization tremendous amounts of time, opportunity, reputation, and maybe even money as a result of that. So, but that's not enough. Interesting enough, all that's done is help the attackers get a little bit more creative and to target us a little bit more specifically. And so what we found is that we needed to go out there and canvass the campus for campaigns to help them understand. So just recently for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, for example, we basically put on a phishing campaign for our students where we brought in Rita's Ice, Swedish fish flavored Italian ice, and Swedish fish flavored candies. And basically, yeah, absolutely food. And we handed out, a few hundred of those to students, faculty, and staff in our student union, teaching them about, how not to fall for a phishing activity. And we're not done yet. We're going to do it again for Data Privacy Month. And we're basically going to set up shop and, give out donuts and make sure they do not give up their security credentials online. And, we really do a lot around that. And we are a Catholic institution, and, Lent is a big time for here on campus, and fish fries are really important in the Catholic faith. And sure enough, we're going to have anti-fishing at the fish fries. So, we're really ramping up our game because it's that important to us. And a single student that falls for this is too many. And so we want to make sure that they're well aware of what's happening on campus and that they should be protecting themselves. Interesting enough, the things that often seem to get them is students who are not quite familiar with the environment, the ones that basically are offering them work where they can make a few $100s extra a week, they seem to really be hitting home, unfortunately. And it just goes to show you how hard it is for college students because they're here trying to take, a full course load, handle the balance of life, trying to stay healthy, and at the same time trying to have enough money that they can do the things that they need to do as adults. And so, it's a tough balance, but we need to keep it up and you need to be persistent.
You mentioned that you have 15 years of experience in a variety of higher education institutions. And I think you last mentioned you were at Carnegie Mellon and then now at Duquesne. You've gone through this planning process, and we heard Don say that right now they're really kind of in early stages for it. As we start to conclude this podcast, can you take us out with maybe some best practice advice for a man like Don, such as maybe like defense in depth or the CIA triad or whatever it is that you bring to it to understand your risks and how do you address those?
Absolutely. So we started, and even when I was at Carnegie Mellon and the security program started, we started very basic. It's newsletters, communications, articles in the paper, alerts that we send out, a web page that we actually, list all of the phishing activity that's happening on campus or vulnerabilities or issues that are out there. We started very basic and just got the word out. And so that's what I'd say first for anyone. Before you start looking at technology to solve these problems, just start making sure that people are aware that they're happening and start to build out practices to actually make them aware. The other thing is build policies. And we talked about the acceptable use policy, but you might need an email policy or a mobile computing policy, or you might need something a little bit more detailed that goes into a little bit about privacy. So you need to really start laying that out. And for us, that really has helped us to lay out the groundwork for what people need to be doing for the services we offer. And then start looking at technology and say, now that I have these in place, here's our policy, here's our awareness. We've done all the things we can do ourselves that are, not that expensive and that are on us or, complete. And then start looking at technology and layer it up, like you said. Protect the identity, put multi-factor authentication in front of your email systems. Get advanced threat protection from some of the email providers. Segment your network wherever possible. Put DLP solutions in place to actually make sure you're not sharing personal information in email that's unencrypted and unsecured. So those types of things, you start to layer that up as much as possible to the point where you feel that you've acceptable risk as much as possible in terms of that compliance. And so that's what we've done. And we're going to keep doing it because they're going to get smarter and we're going to have to get better as time goes on. And we're really looking forward to, continuing to protect our students and serve our mission by, serving God by serving students. And that's what really matters here at Duquesne.
Yeah, that was a good closing statement there, Tom, because like I said, some of that stuff we're just kind of hitting and missing at right now. So I do appreciate appreciate that from my perspective in K-12. And like I said, we are just getting started, and looking forward to try to continue to protect our kids as they come to school for a good education. It's not just the physical protection anymore. It seems to be we need to focus more on their on protection of information as well, and securing their informational resources here.
Yeah, and I did, for the first several months, I didn't have any technology to do this. We did it all ourselves.
Right.
And so, we just started the bare basics and started to really protect the students and block bad users, report them to Microsoft, whatever we could do to make things move forward. And that was really important. And so it's really paid off. And people around the campus are really starting to understand it. We do have security training for our faculty and staff, but we found that the students didn't really, like it as much. So we didn't really push that out as far for them. It didn't seem to apply quite as much. But we are going to go through a phishing campaign, and we are going to start to do automated phishing and start to phish our own community and point them to training and online education that we need. And we really are thankful for what that's going to be able to do for us. And there's some technologies here in Pittsburgh that do lend themselves to help for educational institutions like, higher education and the K-12s. And there's some great pricing around that too.
Yeah, and in your area, then, do you have your own security department, and then there's IT, and then there's hardware and application developer folks, or because we don't have any? It's all under one realm right now. But I see the need to add. If we're looking at cybersecurity, we may need to have the professionals in place to be able to help us work through some of these things.
Absolutely, and the great news about that is, so before I came to Duquesne, they had not had a dedicated security staff, and when I came here. For the first 2 years I was here, I had no additional staff. So my job was really about strategy, governance, and policy. Just last January, I added 2 staff members to really layering in the technology to support what we're doing. And that was really necessary to help us with all the compliance obligations we had to meet. But with that being said, you don't necessarily have to build a team to do it. It's nice to have it, but if you have the opportunity to have some people out there that can help you, and bring in some third-party consultants, that actually can be more beneficial in some cases. You can use them, specifically for the needs you have, and still keep that separated from your operations, because it does blur the lines a little bit sometimes. Yeah. But there are services out there now that you could get a CISO as a service, or you could get some security testing and technology in place and have penetration testing done, or maturity assessment models done, and you don't have to do that all yourself anymore, which is really great. We decided to do it because that became too costly over time.
Yeah, we're in that position right now where I'm going to have somebody come out to do a security vulnerability assessment for us to kind of outsource that and get some information, and that'll give me some idea what we need to do in terms of remediation of once we understand where we're weak at. So that's definitely something that's on one of the top priorities of my plate right
now. Guys, honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on the podcast with you all, and looking forward to seeing the results.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone's time. It was great seeing your perspective at the higher ed standpoint, Tom, and looking forward to doing some more here in the K-12 side as well.
This has been the Intelligent Campus with Greg and Don. Our guest today was Tom Dugas of Duquesne University. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Don. And thanks, Tom. And stay tuned for our upcoming podcast where we'll cover such topics as student-centric services and Safe Campus. Thank you.